Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
So my public records origin story, when I was a kid, we would get every year in town the town report. And it was like this bound volume that would have like all the big bills that the town had paid and contracts and things like that. And in the back was the list of every single town employee and their salaries. And I remember opening it up and looking up all of my teachers to figure out how much money they made.
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of what I do now,
Yep.
is be really nosy
Yep.
and ask for things like salary databases and contracts and bills and spending and everything. So I think about that little kid a lot, and I wonder if there's some other little Allie Jarmanning out there trying to look up how much her teachers make, and maybe she'll become a journalist someday.
You were destined to do the work you're doing.
Here I am.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Comment. Allie Jarmanning, WBUR senior reporter. I am so glad we started with that story because it's a great way to introduce what we are about to talk about today, which is that WBUR just got paid. The town of Natick has paid out more than $22,000 to WBUR, that's us,
Yes.
for withholding records on a police officer accused of sexually assaulting a dispatcher.
Yes.
So before we get into the weeds here, tell us why withholding those records was a problem to begin with. Because not everybody files public records requests like we journalists do, you know?
Right. Yeah. So maybe we should start with like what a public record is.
Hit it.
Cities, towns, states, government agencies, district attorneys' offices, prisons, all sorts of stuff. Those are all public agencies. They're taxpayer funded. And so the information that they have, how they do business, that is all supposed to be public record, with some exceptions. And that's what journalists often use to be able to write stories or understand things more fully, or be able to explain to people what's really going on beyond, you know, the press release or the press conference or the statement that the government officials make. So what we're often doing is basically sending letters and emails to these agencies saying, hey, we want the investigation into that police officer who is accused of doing something wrong, or we want to see the contract with the new superintendent of schools, or we want to see the emails back and forth between that contractor and the head of the department. Sounds simple, right? Like just ask nicely and they'll give it to you.
Right. You have these records. I need these records. Could you please hand them over at your earliest convenience?
Yes. Technically within 10 business days is when they're supposed to do it, but earliest convenience. So, but the reality is, if you're a lawyer, a journalist, a regular citizen, just trying to ask for these kind of things, often you will get ignored. They won't respond to you at all. They might say, no, you can't have these. We don't think they're public. And there often isn't a lot of recourse.
All right. So getting public records can be a pain. Now, to bring it back to WBUR in Natick, tell us more about that situation.
Sure. So investigative reporter Todd Wallach, who you guys have had on recently, Todd found out that there was this police officer named James Quilty who was accused of sexually assaulting a dispatcher during an after-hours gathering of cops and this dispatcher. So Todd put in a records request asking for all sorts of information about this. Stuff as simple as the cop, James Quilty, what was his title and his salary, and could we get his employee photo? We asked for the complaint that the dispatcher had filed against the town and against Quilty for this assault. We wanted to get a copy of the investigation that the town had done because they had let him back onto the force after they had done this investigation and suspended him for a few months. Todd asked for all those things, and we were completely ignored. They didn't respond at all for months and months and months. So 5 months go by, And we knew we were in the right. I mean, at the very least, the public records law says you have to respond. And we knew that some of these, especially these basic things like the photo of him and his salary information and things like that, were definitely public. So we decided to go to court. So that meant we filed a lawsuit against the town of Natick and said that they owed us these records. And as soon as we filed that lawsuit, we started getting the records, which
of course,
is not super rare. And talking to some other attorneys that do this kind of work, they say it often takes a lawsuit to shake loose records. I talked to Sophia Hall. She's the deputy litigation director for Lawyers for Civil Rights. And here's what she told me.
I've had a number of instances in which the moment I serve a civil complaint from court saying, we're going to get a judge involved, the records suddenly appear.
That's not the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
We shouldn't have to file a lawsuit, but that just is the way we have to do it sometimes.
Yeah. And there are some other examples in Massachusetts. There was a big one in Worcester, am I correct?
Yeah. The Worcester Telegram wanted to get copies of internal affairs investigations, a pretty basic record that a lot of reporters would ask for. The city took it to trial, which is really unusual for any kind of lawsuit. They didn't settle it ahead of time, and the Telegram won. They ended up getting $180,000 in their legal fees paid back to them as a result of this lawsuit. So I'm sure that didn't cover all of the legal fees that the Telegram spent on this, but it covered a big chunk. And the thing is, 6 years ago, they wouldn't have been able to get anything because before 2017, there were no provisions in the public records law to get any of your legal fees paid, even if you went to court and won trying to get records.
Do we have a sense of how helpful that 2017 law change has been in acquiring public records?
Well, it's definitely encouraged more lawsuits, and it's made the cities and towns and the government agencies have some kind of interest in handing over records more promptly. So I'll have Sophia Hall from Lawyers for Civil Rights weigh in.
The only reason that we continue to do this work at Lawyers for Civil Rights is because it's one of the primary tools that we have in the state of Massachusetts to ensure that real transparency and accountability exists. I believe the more that we do this work and the more expensive that we make it, the more likely we are to get people to comply.
Lawyers are more able to file lawsuits because they know that they're going to now get paid back for the fees that they're spending. So I talked to a number of lawyers who said, we just didn't have the ability to take on these kind of cases before because it was only the very rich, the very wealthy organizations that could afford to do it. Most people, most news organizations, for instance, it was going to be a hard sell to spend hard-earned money on lawsuits when you didn't know that you were going to be able to get that money back. I know in WBUR's case, we had long discussions about, even though we knew we had the potential to get our legal fees paid back, did we have the money to put up to spend on this? And so you have to be really judicious about what you're spending. And I think if there wasn't this provision to be able to be paid back, I'm not sure that these suits would have gotten filed.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
And we are back with more from Allie Jarmanning. These payouts can be costly, so why do municipalities continue to withhold records?
One, I think the majority of public records requests never lead to a lawsuit. So a lot of cities and towns can take the gamble that they can deny or delay and not have any repercussions as a result. It takes a lot of work on a requester's behalf to kind of keep going back and keep on them. I mean, a lot of cities and towns, I think, figure someone's going to ask for some records. If we don't respond or we say no, they might never come back again.
Yeah. And a lot of times that's the case, right?
Yeah.
People just say, all right, screw it, I can't get it.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, Howard Friedman, he's a civil rights attorney who has had some wins against the city of Boston. And he also, a judge just ordered the Bristol County District Attorney's Office to pay him $44,000 in legal fees as part of a different case. Here's what he said about this whole idea of continuing to sue.
But if you keep suing them, I think, they might begin to see the light.
So I think that's the hope for a lot of us that do this work, that, the next time we go back to, say, Boston, that they might respond differently because of previous lawsuits that we've had. So, here's what Friedman told me about that.
Having successfully sued Boston, my requests get treated differently, I think, than other people's requests because they don't want me to sue them again. Well, that's good, but not really totally what we're looking for.
So that kind of gets to the issue, too, that a regular person without a news organization or a law firm behind them probably can't file a lawsuit. It's going to be much harder for them to find an attorney that's going to represent them. This law change makes it a little bit easier, but it's not the panacea to fixing the public record system in Massachusetts by any means.
So, Allie, I want to take a step back and talk about public information requests in general for people who are not journalists. Why would somebody want to file a public information request, and how do they go about doing it?
So the why is a really good question. If you're just a regular person going about your life, I think for a lot of people, they get into this because they have a question or a curiosity about something that they see. So maybe there is a pothole on their street that never gets fixed, and they want to know what is going on with that. You might put in a request for all the complaints that have come in about that particular pothole, or
maybe you're a nosy student who wants to know how much their teachers are making.
1,000%. So there's all these kind of questions and frustrations, I think, that come up in people's lives. And you can find out a little bit more information about what's going on. And there's also just the flat out issue of your taxpayer dollars pay for everything that your government does. And you deserve to know how that's working.
Mm-hmm. Now, how does someone go about doing it?
So if you want to put in a public records request, it's actually pretty simple. You just have to figure out who the records access officer is in your town. So every town has one. In Boston, there's a guy named Sean Williams. He is in charge of the records office. In other cities and towns, it might just be your town clerk. And so all you have to do is send an email to that person. In Boston, if you just Google public records in Boston, it will take you right to the main page, and there's a form that you can fill out there. And all you have to do is just say, I am filing a public records request. I am asking for the superintendent's contract or the salary database of everybody that works here. And they have 10 business days to get back to you. And my recommendation, and this is what I always do, is put a little reminder for myself on my calendar after those 10 business days to just check in and say, hey, what's going on with this? Because they do have to respond to you by then. If they don't get back to you, or if they deny you and you think that that's wrong, all you have to do is send an email to the supervisor of public records and say, hey, I disagree with what they did here. Once you get used to the whole routine of asking for these kinds of things and then knowing the cadence of when they have to get back to you, what to do if they say no, what to do if they don't respond at all, it gets a little easier. And I've been really heartened when I see, non-professional journalists, non-lawyers asking for records about things that are happening in their city or town. Because the sad thing is when I started as a reporter 15 years ago, I covered 2 individual towns for the local newspaper on the South Shore, the Quincy Patriot Ledger. And Now there are so few reporters assigned to individual towns anymore. So you might be in a community that has no reporter that's doing this kind of work on a regular basis. So I really do think it's kind of up to all of us, wherever we live, to start to do this kind of work.
Allie, as always, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming through to The Common and sharing all this information with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
That's WBUR senior reporter Allie Jarmanning. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you like what you're hearing, please go to wherever you listen to podcasts, especially Apple or Spotify. Rate and review us. It would help us out a lot. Thank you so much to everybody who already has. And if you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR The Common or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I will talk to you tomorrow.